Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the WellMed Institute's recurring webinar series. Our objective is to highlight the immense diversity of the Baha'i teachings and the ways they contribute to the contemporary world, particularly to the prevailing discourses of society. In today's session, we have the privilege of hearing Nima Rafi'i speaking about the theme of the writings of the Bab, which is not exactly a prevailing discourse of society, but perhaps someday it will. Our webinars are free and open to all. The talks are streamed live on our YouTube channel and recorded for future viewing. Furthermore, you can also listen to the audio version of this broadcast by accessing our podcasts on platforms like SoundCloud, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We trust that you will find the program enriching and encourage you to share it with others. Before I introduce our speaker today, let me say something about our upcoming webinars. We have 2 more left this year, possibly a 3rd one once it's confirmed. On Tuesday, November 7th, not our usual Sunday, we will be hearing from Dr. Farzin Aghdassi, a Baha'i who works in the Silicon Valley, about artificial intelligence and ethics, a search for coherence. We're particularly encouraged and excited to hear this particular talk since it deals with a very important issue. Then in early December, on December the 10th, Sunday, December the 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern, our usual time, Karen Ann Webb will be speaking about the Rache Amma in Living Color, a paper that she wrote some time back for a WellMed Institute course that was particularly well done, and she's going to be presenting that. Then we have one course coming up soon that I thought I should mention, Sustainable Development and Human Prosperity, which begins on October 25th. It's an excellent course that looks into the whole question of sustainability and the continued existence of humanity on this fragile planet that we live on. Now, turning to our speaker, Nima Rafi'i. He was born and raised in Minnesota, currently resides in Chicago, Illinois. He received a BA in History and Political Science from the University of Minnesota in 2013, and then obtained a Master of Arts in Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Chicago in 2021, where he studied both classical and modern Arabic and Persian literature. His interests are in Babi and Baha'i studies, particularly, including the mystical writings of Baha'u'llah from the Baghdad period and the Bab's commentaries on the surahs of the Quran and Islamic oral traditions. He also has contributed to English translations of Baha'i texts from the original Arabic and Persian. His talk today, the Bab's Epistle to the Ulama, is a summary and review of his master's thesis, where he translated this particular tablet into English under the supervision of Dr. Frank Lewis, the former he's passed away about a year ago. He was a professor of Persian literature at the University of Chicago and a beloved figure for many of us. So without further discussion, I will now turn it all over to Nima. Nima, welcome to this particular webinar. We're delighted to have you here, and we very much are grateful for your contribution to it.
Thank you, dear Rob. I'm really happy to be here to. This is my first webinar. This is outside of submitting my master's thesis for grad school. This is probably the first time or first space in which I'm giving any sort of presentation or speaking to this particular initiative. And I'm very much indebted to the memory of my late advisor, Professor Frank Lewis, who you just mentioned. He passed away around this time last year, and he really guided me through this work, as well as some other studies, some classes that I took from him, and I remember him very fondly. With regards to this particular work and any scholastic or academic endeavor going forward. There's a kind of a sweet backstory to this, how I came to choose this particular work of the Bab. This happened. This actually has roots to about 10 years ago when I finished college in Minnesota, and I had a lot more time on my hands apart from working to pursue extracurricular endeavors. And I had studied up until that point, 2-3 years of modern standard Arabic, and I thought that, oh, well, this should be sufficient to some extent to allow me to sit down and read writings of the Bab in Arabic, and maybe even try my hand at translating them into English on a purely provisional basis. So I sat down one day and I opened up one of my books from which this text is found, the Bab's Epistle to the Ulama, and it struck me as very interesting. And so I sat down with pen and paper and tried to begin translating it, and just found myself utterly incapable. And that it really required a lot more diligent preparation and study of the Quran, the Arabic from the Quran. Sometime in 2013, I wrote a message to the Baha'i World Center, and I had asked the Office of the Secretariat for if there's any sort of guidance or suggestions from the Baha'i World Center, from the Universal House of Justice, about how to proceed with studying the writings of the Bab in a systematic manner and translating them. And the response I got, the response I received from the World Center heavily emphasized familiarity with the Quran and the chapters of the Quran and the themes and the content and the language of the Quran and the Islamic oral tradition. So it was clear to me that a lot of preparation, a lot of familiarity with these particular sources needs to also be acquired. One should spend a lot of time studying the Quran because there is an inherent symmetry. There is an inherent divine symmetry and connectedness between the Quran as sacred revelation for the Islamic dispensation and the writings of the Bab, particularly the early writings of the Bab. And so about 10 years later, when I was in graduate school, struggling to find a master's thesis topic, I was brainstorming with Professor Lewis one day, and it occurred to me that at one time, there was this epistle from the Bab addressed to the divines that I had attempted to translate 10 years ago and couldn't really get through it. And so Professor Lewis suggested to me, he said, okay, perfect. This sounds like an excellent project for your thesis. A textual study, you can contribute a translation now that you've taken some studies of the Quran in classical Arabic, and talk about the features of the text and how it fits into the history of 19th century Iran, the history of religion in 19th century Iran. There's your MA thesis. And so I went for it full speed ahead. And so I credit him in large part to this thesis reaching completion and completing the translation of this work. So for those who are here today, I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation as kind of a visual aid, in addition to me just kind of verbally talking about a lot of stuff to kind of guide through several components of this study. So we'll address some of the underlying contextual history, talking about the intellectual developments in the world of Shi'ism, especially Twelver Shi'ism in the 19th century, leading up to the declaration of the Bab and the beginnings of the Babi faith, and some of the initial history of the inception of the Babi movement, leading up to the revelation, the composition of this particular work by the Bab. So with that being said, I'm going to pull up the presentation here. And dear Rob, if I could get you to verbally confirm if my presentation is on the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, now I'm going to move this display over here. So those who are here today, I kind of chose the title of the presentation deliberately. We have, we have a volume of writings of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, addressed to the sovereigns and the kings, the rulers of the earth, as well as some of the religious leaders, particularly the Pope, referred to as the summons of the Lord of Hosts. And for this particular presentation, I thought it would be apt to refer to this particular writing of the Bab as the summons of the Lord of the Age. One of the titles of the eschaton of the 12th Imam in Shi'ism is Sahib al-Zaman, or Waliya Asr. And both of these terms in Arabic and Persian mean the Lord of the Age, or the master of time. And that all of history, all of sacred history, is fulfilled in the advent and the appearance of the 12th Imam. And so this very much is a summons, like many of the early writings of the Bab, and not just the early ones, but throughout his ministry. These are summons, these are challenges and calls to all of the classes of society, including the ulama, the divines. Pictured here is a house of the Bab in Shiraz in Iran, which was destroyed after the 1979 revolution in Iran. And we have a quote from Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, in his book, The Promised Day Has Come, where he says, the Bab, as attested by the Kitab-i-Iran, which was written by Baha'u'llah, has specifically revealed an epistle unto the divines of every city, wherein he hath fully set forth the character of the denial and repudiation of each of them. Now, we don't know specifically to which work Shoghi Effendi, or by extension Baha'u'llah, is referring to, but it could very well be this one, because this work is titled as such. It was distributed widely to the divines in Iran, and so this is to kind of set the stage, as it were. So, as all of you, I'm sure, are familiar, any study of 19th century Iran or any study of the 19th century in general shows that there was a lot of messianic fervor in the world, both in the world of Islam and in the world of Christianity in the West in particular. There were some pretty major intellectual disputes and developments taking place in the world of Shi'ism in Iran and Iraq. So by the end of the 18th century, if we focus on that period, there were two main schools of thought and practice, if you will. Both of these schools are the Usuli and Akhbari schools. The Usuli school is now the dominant trend and has been the dominant intellectual practical trend in the world of Shi'ism since the end of the 18th century. It's manifested its form at present today in Iran with the Islamic Revolution in 1979 and the rulership of the jurist. The Akhbari school, by contrast, was a much more traditionalist school, in that they did not find it permissible for theologians to derive any sort of legalistic ruling or jurisprudential ruling on anything other than the text of the Quran and the oral tradition from the Prophet Muhammad and from any of the 12 Imams. And that anything outside of those two sources was not acceptable unto them. So the Akhbaris were dominant in the Atabat region, where the main seminaries for theology and for learning had been established. And by the end of the 18th century, we see a major shift in this particular setting. So one fellow by the name of Agha Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Behbahani, who's also referred to as Vahid Behbahani. He died sometime, the date of his passing isn't quite clear. Some sources say that it's the early to mid 1790s. One other source from Said Arjumand indicates his date of passing is at the beginning of the 19th century, so we're not quite clear, but we know that he passed away sometime in the late 18th, early 19th century. He really kind of was the one who led the routing, as it were, of the Akhbaris from the seminaries in the shrine cities of Najaf and Karbala. And Najaf and Karbala being located in Iraq, these are two very, very significant shrine cities for the Shia faithful. The seminary in Najaf for centuries, has enjoyed a very prominent position as far as the study of theology and jurisprudence is concerned. One person I actually studied with at the University of Chicago, who's in a PhD program, he was a graduate of the seminary in Najaf. And I used to see him on campus every now and then. He would have some of his clerical attire with him. So Behbahani kind of leads the charge, as it were, and he really succeeds in diminishing the influence of the Akhbaris. And so the Usulis kind of become full front and center on the scene of the seminary. And the Usulis have this notion of being able to use deductive reasoning to make rulings on legal affairs, which is in contrast to what I just mentioned about the Akhbaris. Behbahani was largely successful because he was willing to denounce his opponents as infidels, which was kind of a practice that was somewhat shunned away from. People were not willing to necessarily go that far in their disputes with one another. Case in point, Behbahani, in one instance that's related by Abbas Amanat, he, in the shrine of Imam Hussein in Karbala, he declared himself to be the proof of God, Hujjatullah. Hujjatullah is one of the titles that's reserved for the imams in Shiism. So when we hear that Behbahani, makes this declaration, and of course he's not making a messianic claim, but he rather uttered this claim as a means to kind of really cement his position and to kind of advance the kind of the intellectual position that he was trying to push forward and make dominant in the seminaries. And after him, we have a few other figures in the shrine cities, such as Mullah Ahmad Naraqi and Sheikh Muhammad Hassan Najafi, who's referred to as Sahibul Jawahir. Sheikh Najafi wrote this extensive tome on fiqh, jurisprudence. It's an extensive manual, about 40 some odd volumes, and I think it's still somewhat in use today in the seminary setting. He's pictured right here with a kind of a cheerful disposition, which was kind of rare for mid-19th century photographs from Iran. And Najafi himself, by reason of his prominence, he had become referred to as Ra'is al-Ulama, the chief of the ulama, or the chief of the learned, and the deputy of the imam, Na'ib Imam. Na'ib Imam is a very technical term in Shiism. After the 12th Imam is said to have gone into hiding or into occultation, ghaibat. In the initial lesser period, he was said to have had 4 emissaries that claimed to be in contact with him. And these 4 emissaries were, one of their titles was Na'ib, that they were the emissary of the Imam, and they conveyed his communications and messages to the faithful while he was in hiding. So for Sheikh Hassan Najafi to, bear the title of deputy of the Imam as a jurist, as a very accomplished jurist in the seminary setting, we can see that that's very representative of a growing effort on behalf of the Usuli school of jurisprudence to cement a greater claim of charismatic authority and leadership over the community of the faithful in the absence of the imam. Fast forwarding to a few decades, while this is happening, this intellectual divide, we have the emergence of the Shaykhi movement with Sheikh Ahmad Asai and Sayyid Kazim Rashdi. Sheikh Ahmad Asai himself, in some of his teachings, he kind of undermined this project of the Usulis, in that one could say, Sheikh Ahmad taught that one could access the 12th Imam through a series of ecstatic visions or dreams in a state of meditation or prayer. So Sheikh Ahmad kind of undermines this claim to vicegerency from the Usulis and kind of democratizes access to the 12th Imam. That access to the 12th Imam is not solely limited to those folks who are, in that cage or that cadre of the ulama who have studied a lot and have, scholastic authority to their name. But for any soul who engages in devotion and, in meditation, they can essentially be in contact with the imam or have experiences where they are in contact with him. So this kind of undermines this Usuli claim that some of the ultra learned are the only ones who can, claim to occupy any sort of office of vicegerency. After the passing of Sheikh Ahmad, his successor, Sayyid Kazim Rashdi, kind of took this another step further, and the Shaykhis modified lightly the Usul ad-Din, as they're called, the principles of religion. In Shi'ism, one of the principles of the faith, one of the 5 principles, is God's justice, or adl. And what Sayyid Kazim and Sheikh Ahmad did in kind of formulating the teachings and principles of the Shaykhi school, they combined 2 of the traditional Shia pillars, adl being one of them, and deduced a new pillar called ma'rifat, or ma'rifa, which is knowledge, knowledge of God. Then another pillar was added called the what they refer to as the perfect Shi'ah, the Shi'at al-Kamil, or Shi'iyya Kamil in Persian. And this Shi'iyya Kamil, this figure, similar to the earlier famous writer Ibn Arabi, who postulated about Insan Kamil, the perfect human, the Shi'iyya Kamil was to be a believer, someone in this immediate realm who had all manner of perfect virtues and could claim to be representative or in contact with the occultated 12th Imam, the Imam who, according to the Shaykhis, is not physically present in this world, but he exists in an immaterial realm referred to as Urqaliya. And that this Shi'iyya Kamil, this perfect person, this perfect Shi'ah in this world, could represent him and be in contact with him. So really briefly, I know the slide on the screen here says sources for the Kitab al-Ulama. Very briefly, I'll just cover some of the initial history of the Babi movement. So after the passing of Sayyid Kazim, the Bab, after an encounter with one of the Shaykhi disciples, Mullah Hussein Bushroiye, on the evening of May 22nd of 1844, declares his station to Mullah Hussein to be the promised Qa'im, and to be the promised one who the Shaykhis had been anticipating, that his advent was at hand. And The inception of the Babi movement begins on that evening, and the Bab reveals and writes the first chapter of his initial book, the Qayyumul Asma, the Suratul Mulk. Not long after this, a group of early believers who heard some of Mullah Hussein's sermons and preaching at a nearby mosque, they became known as the Letters of the Living, the Huruf-e-Hay. And one of these Letters of the Living, Mullah Ali Bastami, travels to the shrine cities of Iraq to convey the message and the declaration of the Bab to the seminarians. The Sheikh Hassan Najafi, who was referred to earlier, is one of the people that Mullah Ali Bastami had an audience with. And upon presenting some of the writings of the Bab to him and conveying the claims and the nature of the Bab's declaration to Sheikh Najafi, an uproar broke out and he was expelled from Najafi's presence. Mullah Ali Bastami was tried in a tribunal, a kind of a very unprecedented tribunal that consisted of both Sunni and Shia divines in Iraq. And in the fatwa that resulted from this tribunal, all of the clerics essentially read and deduced that the author of the Qayyumul Asma, who was the Bab, had claimed to be the recipient of divine revelation. And of course, in traditional Islamic belief, in Orthodox Islamic belief, the Quran is the final revelation from God, and there is no prophecy after Muhammad. Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, and there is no revelation that'll come to anyone after him. And so the assemblage of clerics, both the Sunni and Shia, they understood that the author of these words had made a claim to be the recipient of divine revelation. And thereafter, Mullah Ali Bastami had been, imprisoned. And then he had also been eventually sentenced to hard labor and was exiled to north in the Ottoman Empire, where he endured a lot of hard labor and eventually passed away. Not long after the initial declaration, the Bab sets forth on pilgrimage and goes to the Hejaz region in the Arabian Peninsula. He performs the rite of pilgrimage in the cities of Medina and Mecca. During this time, there are a lot of other writings of the Bab that come into fruition and that he writes. We have liturgical works such as the Saif-e Makhzuneh. There are a number of khutbahs or sermons that the Bab composes. There are individual letters that the Bab composes to prominent clerical families, such as the Asfur family in, I believe they were in Bushehr. I can't recall at this time. The Asfur family was quite a prominent family that the Bab had addressed some of the members of that family, as well as some of the prominent sheikhis who eventually became opposed to the Bab and opponents of the Babi community. Mirza Muhit Kermani, Mirza Hassan Gohar, and especially Haj Karim Khan Kermani being among them. So the aforementioned Gohar and Muhit Kermani, the Bab addressed both of them with tablets, challenging them to come and accept his claim. And the Bab is quite emphatic in his challenge that there is no middle ground. You either accept the claim that I have made and that the nature of my words is revelation, or you deny it. There is no middle ground. There's no bargaining. And eventually the Bab returns from pilgrimage to Iran he sets forth in about February or March of 1845. And then he arrives in, I believe, in Bushehr. I apologize, I might be getting some of this mixed up, so don't don't take this as gospel. In about June of 1845, I believe the Bab is in Shiraz. He may have arrived in Shiraz from Bushehr. And at this time, this is roughly when the Bab composed this particular work, the Kitab al-Ulama. So getting into some of the sources. So really quickly, and a note on the sources, the Wilmette Institute previously, there are some presentations, there's some material on YouTube from a few years ago that Dr. Stephen Phelps put together for what's called the partial inventory. I would not have been able, this study, this thesis would not have been possible without the use of that resource, the partial inventory. So an immense word of gratitude goes to Stephen Phelps for putting that particular resource together. And for those who are interested, you can search for this on YouTube or Google, the partial inventory, and learn more about it. So the Kitab al-Ulama, or the epistle to the ulama, it's available, it's extant in several sources. Chief among them is a wonderful book in Persian by the late Abu Qasim Afnan, referred to as titled Ahd A'la, about the Babi dispensation and the life of the Bab. The entire text of the Kitab al-Ulama is reproduced in this book. It's typeset. In addition to this book, we do have at least 7 manuscript copies of this work from the former National Baha'i Archives of Iran. There's a series of some 100 plus manuscripts that have loosely been referred to as the INBA volumes, the Iran National Baha'i Archives. Excuse me. 2 of the volumes in this series, volume 67 and 91, contain a copy of this work. There are also some additional manuscripts from the former National Baha'i Archives of Iran. These are referred to as 4011C, 4012C, 6002C, and 6007. Just a quick note regarding these sources, INBA volume 91 and 4011C are some of the earliest sources that are publicly available. They're both dated to 1845, which is the same year that this work was written. In addition to that, we have one of the volumes of the prolific Baha'i historian and scholar, Mirza Asadullah Fazil Mazandarani. The second volume of his extensive tome called Tarikh Zuhur al-Haq. The second volume at present is not published. It exists in manuscript form, a handwritten manuscript, and it covers the history and the life of the Bab. And Janab Fazil has quoted from quite a few writings of the Bab in this volume, including the text of the Kitab al-Ulama. In addition to this, we have 3 sources from a special collection at the Princeton University Library called the Miller, or the William Miller Collection. William Miller was a Christian preacher who took an interest in the Babi and Baha'i faiths and collected a lot of manuscript materials from Iran about the Babi and Baha'i movement. There are a lot of manuscripts of writings of the Bab at the University of Princeton in their library. 3 of these manuscripts in that collection do have this work. We have one source from the famous Orientalist E.G. Browne at the University of Cambridge. This particular source, it was transcribed in 1912 by an individual, Ismail Sabagh Sedehi, who was referred to as Mirza Mustafa. He was a prolific scribe and copyist of Babi works, and was an Azali Babi, who was a follower of Baha'u'llah's half-brother Mirza Yahya. 2 passages of this work are quoted by the late Muhammad Ali Faizi, a really prolific Baha'i historian and writer, in his monograph Hazrat Nuqtay Ula. Hazrat Nuqtay Ula is a book about the life of the Bab and the history of his life. He quotes quite a few writings from the Bab, including these 2 passages. And I also was able to find there's a manuscript that presumably belongs to a member of the Azali Babi community in Iran. The provenance of that source can't be assessed. There's no date, but this particular manuscript does have a copy of the Kitab al-Ulama. So the approach I took for the study, the text that I chose for translating was the text provided by Mr. Afnan in his book Ahd Allah. And then essentially what I've also done in the study, in the thesis, is I've created kind of an inventory, as it were, to show what the textual variants are between the various manuscripts and sources. There are variants, which is to be expected for this sort of thing, but the variants are usually quite minor and not really all that consequential. So I've made a bit of an inventory in the footnote section saying, you know, this manuscript says such and such, and this one says such and such, or doesn't contain these words. So the translation itself, when I carried it out, was based on Mr. Afnan's book. So a few words. This is kind of the, and I know maybe we're running a little bit short on time. So this is kind of the creme de la creme. This is like the main thing about the presentation that I think is really important, is talking about the themes of the text and the content and kind of contextualizing it. So really briefly, when the Bab goes on pilgrimage and departs Iran, one of the people who is on board the same ship as him is an individual named Sheikh Abu Hashem. And Sheikh Abu Hashem is an individual who is quite envious and displays a great degree of animosity towards the Bab. Now, Mr. Afnan writes that part of the reason that Sheikh Abu Hashem had a lot of animosity towards the Bab is because he had read some of the Bab's early writing, including the Saif-e-Makhzuneh and the Bab's commentary on the chapter of the cow, the Tafsir Surah Baqarah from the Quran. And he really just couldn't get over or get past the notion that this young man from Shiraz has never entered a seminary. He has not pursued the seminary sciences from beginning to end. And he's not a man of the cloth. He's not a mujtahid, or, you know, is not of the same rank as the really learned ulama. And yet he was able to compose these immensely creative and beautiful writings in Arabic, no less. And he's a merchant. So with this, bearing this animosity in mind, Sheikh Abu Hashem, towards the end of their journey going back to Iran, he dispatches a report to the eminent divines in Shiraz. And in this report, he kind of lambasts the Bab and I'm sure makes up a whole host of charges and accusations that are directed at him and are, you know, his intent is to undermine and malign his character. So with that in mind, my thinking, and this is just a thought, my thinking is that historically speaking, this particular tablet was especially intended for the eminent divines in Shiraz who were there. But it also has a very universal audience. It's very clear from reading the text that anyone from the ulama are being addressed here. But in the immediate context of the Bab's journey to the Hijaz and this Sheikh Abu Hashem, and surely, you know, as it were, the word had gotten out about the Bab and his claims from Mirza Muhit Kermani, Mirza Hassan Gohar, some of these prominent sheikhis. And so it's quite possible that the Bab wanted to, you know, address these people in Shiraz on his own terms. Now, that leads us into the substance of the work. You know, in this work, the Bab identifies himself with several epithets. He is the remembrance of God, zikrullah, the word of God, kalimatullah, and the name of God, ismullah. The Bab frequently refers to the fact that he is untutored, just like the Prophet Muhammad was unlettered and couldn't read or write. And perhaps one of the biggest, most important aspects of this work and other early works of the Bab is an echoing of a challenge in the Quran, which is a challenge to the ulama, a challenge to the learned to produce a surah like unto it. I'm going to address some of the technical terminology here in terms of genre. We have words, we have technical terms like surah, kitab, and khitab when we're talking about texts. So surahs traditionally are, they're like an independent unit of text that are made up of verses. And, it's a term that usually applies to the Quran. It's also a term that is used frequently in the Babi and Baha'i dispensations. In the Bab's first work, the Qayyum al-Asma, all of the chapter headings are referred to as surahs. Now, we also have standalone works from the Bab and Baha'u'llah that are referred to as surah. Case in point, we have the Surah Qalam from Baha'u'llah. We have the Surah Wafa from Baha'u'llah as well. So given that this is, don't want to get too fixated on it. One could refer to this work as a surah or as a kitab, especially given that it's an independent work. It is an independent unit of text in and of itself. We talked about the recipients just a moment ago. I believe, the recipients are meant, they're meant to be the ulama across the board. Anyone who reads this, especially the Shia ulama in Iran, in Iraq, and in the Hijaz. A note on the style and the content. This work of the Bab reads very closely to the Qayyum al-Asma. The style of Arabic, which the Bab employs, is similar to the Quran. The technical term for it is sajja or musajja for rhymed Arabic prose, and also an early work of the Bab that he composed while returning from the Hijaz called the Kitab al-Ruh, or the Book of the Spirit. So this is very much an extension, a continuation of the Quranic-like Arabic and revealed in the mode of divine verses or ayat. One of the main themes, probably one of the most important underlying themes of this work, is the Bab echoing a challenge which we find in the Quran. There are two verses from the Quran here to kind of situate this properly. The first one, were all mankind to come together and wish to produce the like of the Quran, they would never succeed, however much they aided each other. And also here, or do they say he forged it? Say, bring then a surah like unto it, and call to your aid anyone you can. The Prophet Muhammad had been accused by his detractors amongst the pagan Arabs, especially those who were celebrated poets. Because in pre-Islamic Arabia, the composition and recitation of poetry was a really highly prized feat in that tribal society. And there were certain rules, regulations, and norms about the composition of poetry. And when some of the pagan Arabs had heard the verses of the Quran, they mocked it and ridiculed it because it didn't conform to that which was current amongst them. There's even an instance of the Prophet and the Quranic text being mocked by the pagan Arabs for introducing non-Arabic words in the text. Sijil is a term that appears in the Quran, which is said to be of a Syriac origin, meaning baked clay. And so the Quran was mocked for not being pure Arabic. So there was this same phenomenon occurred with the revelation of the Quran and the reception of the Quranic text. That it's not like pagan poetry. It doesn't conform to the same standards of excellence that the pagan tribal Arabian society had entertained and prized. And so the Quranic text issues a challenge unto these self-proclaimed poets, that if you believe this to be a forgery, or if you believe you can write something better, then come forth and bring it. If we fast forward several centuries and we take into consideration the full development of the Islamic sciences and disciplines, Arabic grammar and syntax, and what they call eloquence or balagha in Arabic, had been fully fleshed out in Islamic science. So a lot of these mujtahids are specialists in grammar and syntax and eloquence, the eloquence of Arabic language. So this is a body of knowledge that has been, just permeated. There are all these permutations of expanding it, and all these manuals that are written about these pursuits. And they come to criticize the writings of the Bab, the Qayyim al-Asma and others, because it doesn't truly conform in instances to the text of the Quran, the standard of grammar and syntax according to the Quran. And lo and behold, what you can imagine, the circle is now complete. The circle is now complete. The same historic incidents of the pagan Arabs criticizing the Quran happens again with the coming of the Bab, and the learned in society reading his works and mocking it and ridiculing it and accusing the Bab of forgery. And so it seems only natural then that the Bab issues the same exact challenge to them, that if you can, produce a surah like it and gather everyone amongst you in all of creation to do so, you'll be utterly incapable. The same challenge lends itself to this idea. It further reinforces the idea that the text of the Bab's word, the word that he has written, is of the same rank as the Quran, that it is divine revelation. So this is one of the main underlying challenges of this text. I grabbed a few excerpts from the translation, and I just like to emphasize that this is not an official translation. This is not an authorized translation. This is just something that I've done for the purpose of my master's thesis. Excuse me. And so I just want the folks who are here today, the friends who are here, to know that this is not a translation that's been done by the Baha'i World Center, and that it's just purely provisional. And it should be understood that it's individual provisional translation, and it still needs a lot of tweaking. I was reviewing it just recently and kind of thinking to myself, why did I do that? I need to fix this. And that's the nature of translation. There will always be opportunities to improve. So pursuant to what was just discussed about the challenge that the Bab issues to his audience of learned ones, I picked a few quotes from the text, and I put them up on the screen here. So I'll pick one quote from this slide. Do you think that in rejecting the verses of God from the remembrance, you are following religion? Immeasurably exalted is God above all they associate with him. Verily, the religion is set forth in the book of God. Whosoever believes in him and his verses and follows the most wondrous decree, indeed, those are the rightly guided. Fear God, O people of the Furqan, and follow his decree from the remembrance, that haply he may deal mercifully with you. The religion, as set forth in the book of your Lord, is the path unto God in the heavens and the earth. Just a quick note here, Furqan is a term that also refers to the Quran. It's another name for the Quran. What has befallen you? How do you not perceive even in the slightest? Would you pervert the religion of God, all the while believing in his verses, the Quran, with no sanction from us? Woe unto you, O concourse! How is it you repudiate that which is sent down from me upon the heart of my servant, the Bab, even though you believe in the verses of the Quran? Do you not find it astonishing that when God sends the one who you have constantly implored him to send to you to fulfill his decree, and reveals the book to him to warn you of the days of God, you repudiate him because he is an ordinary man like you? And in this last quote down here, be patient, O remembrance of God, and sorrow not at what the infidels utter. For the people of Arabia from aforetime spoke of the Quran similar to what the people of the Quran said concerning the verses of your Lord. This is not but fables of those of old. Some among them lied about the nature of God in his verses and said, these verses are not but from tales of old. And some among them slandered our verses, claiming that the word sijil in the Quran is a foreign word. Say, glory be to God above the partners they ascribe. There's kind of this, as I mentioned, there's this thread, there's this consistent thread that the Bab is kind of producing in this work. And he also emphasizes, like I mentioned earlier, that he's untutored and he's unlearned. So anyone who is, in the stature of being a jurist or a mujtahid or a seminarian at that time, they'll kind of be able to read between the lines when the Bab emphasizes that he's untutored and unlettered. He's comparing himself, or he's invoking the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And so with this comparison, this inherent comparison, it's clear, along with many other items and in passages in this text, that from the very beginning of his ministry, the Bab is claiming to be a manifestation of God, and that the sacred history, as it were, is being renewed, and the divine covenant is being renewed. And so there's a lot more I could discuss here. Perhaps if I may, just one more passage I'll read here, and then perhaps we can move to questions from those who are in attendance. The Bab says, O assemblage of the people of the Furqan, if you fear God by reason of his justice, and then none among you heeds the call of the remnant of God. Remnant of God is Baqiyatullah. This is one of the titles of the 12th Imam. Then what is the difference between you and the Kharijites, or the Khawarij? Were they, the Kharijites, following the religion in their deeds by denying on the day of the scripture the command of the Quran? Wherefore have you disbelieved in the verses of God so flagrantly and foolishly? Fear God, O people of the book, and deal not falsely with our servant, for indeed he is an exalted straight path. Really quickly, the Kharijites, this is a very, very loaded and amazing challenge by the Bab. The Kharijites were a party of Muslims who, during the battle of, I believe it was the Battle of Siffin, between the Imam Ali and Muawiyah. There was a group of people in Imam Ali's army who, once they heard that Ali was going to treat with Muawiyah and try to reach a resolution to their conflict, they left Ali and said that, because you're the Imam, you're the head of the community, you're committing blasphemy by going to treat with those who are challenging you. So we're quit of you. And they became Ali's enemies. And eventually one of them actually killed Ali while he was praying in the mosque. And what the Bab refers to here, he refers to something called the Day of the Scripture. And this is a bit of a cryptic or an enigmatic term. It can be understood in a few ways. The Day of the Scripture, the original Arabic the Bab uses is Yom al-Mushaf. Mushaf in Arabic is the technical term that refers to the text of the Quran. Now, what's said to have occurred at the Battle of Siffin is in order to force this arbitration, there were people in the army of Muawiyah who fixed to the tips of their spears copies of the Quran. And once this had been done, it would have been ritually absolutely impermissible to ride forth into battle and engage with the sacred text on the spear. That would be, blasphemous to do. So after they had affixed these, the Quran or these mushafs to their spears, that's what ultimately forced this arbitration. And then that party from Imam Ali's army got up and left because they refused to accept any arbitration and said that Ali was wrong theologically. He was just wrong to treat with Muawiyah. And so the Day of the Scripture could be referring to that. The Bab is actually it's quite challenging. He's comparing the ulama, that class in society which prides itself on its religious learning and its piety, so-called piety, and draws a comparison and says, in this instance, you are not all that different from these people who fixed the Quran to their spears in order to, force an arbitration. What's the difference between you and them? If there is one, I challenge you to say otherwise. So again, there is a lot more I can say. I apologize to everyone here. I know that maybe it's not an entirely sufficient amount of time to cover everything, but I hope that this has been engaging and interesting, and hopefully inspiring to those who are here. We can take questions and comments. I'd be happy to address what I can. And for those who are interested and kind of want to know a little bit more about this, you're welcome to contact me and reach out to me. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Stockman.
Thanks so much, Nima. This is fascinating, really, to have the access to information about this tablet. I think people will be very grateful to have the chance to learn about it. And on top of that, you gave a very good summary of the usulis and the akhbaris. A lot of Baha'is have heard about them, but don't really know much about them or the details of the fight and how it is that the usulis ultimately defeated the akhbaris. And it sounds a bit like the beginning of fights that have continued to this day, actually.
Absolutely.
Within Shi'ism.
Mm-hmm.
We have quite a few comments here, and let me see what we've got here. Barbara says, was it one epistle to all the divines, or was it a different epistle to each divine? Of course, it was a total of one epistle, but I guess it was to all the divines.
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you, Barbara.
It was early on before you'd gotten to the tablet itself.
Right. So again, this is kind of I don't think there's really a documented or neat answer to this question. From the historic consideration. I'm of the opinion, and I could very well be wrong. I'm of the opinion, after consulting the sources, that it's likely the Bab wrote this in response to some of the actions of Sheikh Abu Hashem, who had been traveling with him in the Hijaz and had been displayed quite a bit of animosity towards him. And then by that point in time, the Bab had also addressed several prominent sheikhis, including, I mentioned Mirza Mohit Kermani. He was the recipient of the Bab's Epistle of the Twin Shrines, the Saif Bain al-Haramain, and Mirza Hassan Gohar. I did a presentation at the Akudo Center for Baha'i Studies in 2015 on that Epistle of the Bab to Mirza Hassan Gohar. Unfortunately, I've lost track of the translation I did. I have no idea what happened to it. But keeping this in mind, the word, as I mentioned, like the word had gotten out about the Bab. And so perhaps the Bab saw it fit that he should dispatch something to the divines in Shiraz in his immediate environs and kind of set the record straight, as it were, and engage with them on his own terms rather than let the secondhand word of people who were opposed to him and had ill intention towards him malign his character.
So it's interesting to note then that it's actually, there's no clear trigger for this particular tablet, which is also an important question. And the title Kitabul Ulama or Lohe Ulama, is that a title you've given it, or is it a title that it had?
That's a really good question. Kitabul Ulama is a title that several manuscripts have for it. Some of the sources say at the very beginning in Arabic, هذا الكتاب إلى العلماء in Arabic. This is a book unto the divines. So you can synthesize that and you can contract it and call it Kitabul Ulama. The Bab did write another epistle by the same name later in his ministry, after that kangaroo trial in Tabriz. I think it's of a similar length, and that one is in mixed Arabic and Persian. We don't have a very extensive manuscript tradition for it. I believe the text is only available in two sources. One of them is Mr. Afnan's book that I mentioned, and it is also available in Janab Fazel's Zuhur al-Haq, Volume 2, the manuscript history. I'd be curious, in the future, I may write to the World Center and ask them to shed some light on the second work.
How many pages is the Kitabul Ulama in the original? Do you remember?
On average, the sources that I've seen and consulted, they're usually between 8 to 10 pages long. So it's about it's on the short to maybe medium side. The two copies, there are two copies in the INBA series I was talking about earlier. Volume 91 there's a colophon at the end of that manuscript, which dates it to 1845. So that's the same year that the work was revealed. So it's a quite early source. And then there's another one, volume 67, the colophon of that manuscript, I think comes out to August of 1848. So we have two sources that are from the lifetime of the Bab that are dated to, when he was still living, and one of them, within several months of when this work was first written. I don't have it handy with me. I'm so sorry to everyone who's here. I did write to the Baha'i World Center and raised this question about whether if there is an original or an autograph copy of this work in the Bab's handwriting. From what I recall, in the response I received from the Baha'i World Center, I don't believe an autograph copy has been found at the World Center archives. And it also doesn't sound like there's a copy that was transcribed by either of the Bab's two well-known amanuenses, Sayyid Hossein Yazdi or Mirza Ahmad Ghazvini or Mirza Ahmad Khatib. But I'm sure in the future there will be other sources that come into the hands of the faith, and they'll be unearthed and they'll be identified. Between when I submitted this thesis and when I'm giving this presentation for everyone here today, there is another manuscript source that contains this tablet from the files of the National Baha'i Archives of Iran. It's not from that series of 100 volumes called the INBA, but this volume does contain the text of the Kitab al-Ulama. So it's on my to-do list to go give that a read and just incorporate that one into the inventory I've done, if you will.
It's fascinating to know now, increasingly, just to hear about how many different copies of some of these have survived, how far back they go. We really have a surprisingly rich manuscript collection for the time of the Bab. I know a lot of works were lost, but it's impressive to see that so many have survived, and frequently with multiple manuscripts, which of course is very important because when the things are hand copied, people make mistakes.
And I'm confident in the future, as circumstances change and just as the future naturally unfolds. There's going to be a lot of sources that come into existence and that have been safely kept by folks in Iran. There are manuscripts of the Bab's writings in these same seminary libraries in Iran and Iraq. And I hope for a day that those sources become available, because Lord knows what their provenance is. But I'm sure that these things will come out and they'll be added to the already vast body of sources that we already have.
That's good.
I thought I'd take a really brief moment. There's something that occurred to me after I wrote the thesis. For those of you who have read the Dawnbreakers and perhaps have the accompanying volume of the English translation of the French footnotes for the Dawnbreakers, it occurred to me that there are a few quotations and references that Shoghi Effendi makes in the translation of Nabil's narrative from the work of the French historian Nicolas in his book on the Bab. There are a couple of footnotes here from chapter 8 and chapter 7 of the Dawnbreakers. And so for the one from chapter 7, Nicolas, there's a footnote, it's note number 2. So note number 2 of chapter 7, Nicolas quotes from a work that he says is the Kitab al-Bayn al-Haramain, or the Saif al-Bayn al-Haramain. However, the passage in question is actually from the Kitab al-Ulama, and it corresponds exactly with the text of the Kitab al-Ulama. I went and read through the Saif al-Bayn al-Haramain and wanted to make sure that it wasn't there. So for those who are here and maybe they have Nabil's narrative handy, there are these 2 passages. So the one is note number 2. It's footnote number 2 from chapter 7. I think it falls on pages 129 and 30 of Nabil's narrative. And then also the first footnote of chapter 8 on page 148. There's another quote here from Nicolas that he says is from the Kitab al-Bayn al-Haramain, but this is also another instance of, well, this is actually a passage from the Kitab al-Ulama. And it's interestingly, a passage that reads, and this is the English from the French. This is not a direct from the Arabic, but it's close to the Arabic. He who knows the word of God and does not come to his assistance in the days of violence is exactly like those who turned away from the testimony of His Holiness Hussein, son of Ali, at Karbala. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that word of God is one of the titles of the Bab in the Kitab al-Ulama and in some of the early writings. And you might make the connection, you should make the connection that Christ was the Logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, I believe from the Gospel of John.
Yep.
And so this is an epithet which very clearly the Bab uses to denote, his station is a station which is on par and in the same category as Christ and Muhammad. And it's quite an interesting challenge for those of you who come to know me and hear of me, and you do not join me, and you do not come to aid my cause, then you're exactly like those people who did not join Hussein, the Imam Hussein at Karbala. And this is one of the big historical tragedies about Hussein's martyrdom at Karbala, is he received all of these letters from his supporters in Kufa saying, come here, we want you, we don't want Yazid and the Umayyad dynasty. And then when he came to Iraq, none of his supporters from Kufa came. So the Bab is, comparing himself also, he's drawing this wonderful comparison to this highly, highly revered figure in Shi'ism, highly revered figure, that should you not come and join me, should you not come and arise to aid me in my cause, there's no difference between you and those who failed to assist Hussein and join him at Karbala. So those two passages, they're from the Kitab al-Ulama. So I went and kind of noted that in my copy of Nabil's narrative.
That's very interesting, and of course, probably Nicolas did not have tablets with actually the names on the top.
Right.
And since this was clearly already to Kermani, who was ulama, it'd be easy to make that mistake, I suppose.
Right.
So, yeah. I'm struck by how, frankly, the Bab is proclaiming his station in 1845, when he didn't, I thought, normally come out to do that until after Esfahan, but certainly after he goes to Maku and Chehrip. That's when he really proclaims himself. But clearly here, he's proclaiming himself.
Right. It's, Nader Saidi talks about this in, I think it's the 3rd chapter of Gate of the Heart. And I'd highly encourage everyone to read that book from cover to cover. That despite outward appearances that the Bab was only claiming to be a representative of the Imam, the language and the rhetoric employed by the Bab is unmistakable. And actually, Haj Karim Khan Kermani was one of the first ones to clue into this.
Yeah. And
in his initial, he wrote a radiyya, as they call it, a refutation of the Bab's claims in the Ghaim al-Asma, called Izhaq al-Batil. And, in Izhaq al-Batil, Karim Khan Kermani points out that nothing can be, and I'm not quoting, this is just me paraphrasing. He says, the fact that this young man from Shiraz has written these verses and has said these things in his book, it's clear as day that his claim is to be the recipient of revelation. And this is just tantamount to blasphemy.
Yeah. We
can't accept this.
Yeah.
But absolutely, like after Isfahan, the claim is very, very direct, and it's not, it's not done with kind of enigmatic language or kind of rhetorical devices like the Bab had done early on. I think it'd be wonderful. I mentioned the summons of the Lord of Hosts at the beginning of the presentation. I think it would be great, personally, if in the future, if a volume of writings of the Bab of similar content and scope were to be produced by the Baha'i World Center. So like all of the tablets that are addressed to Muhammad Shah, Haj Mirza Abbasi, the Prime Minister, the Bab's tablet to Sultan Abdul Majid, that my wonderful colleague and friend Nechati Alkan has previously written about. And then, this and the other epistle of the Bab addressed to the ulama, to the upper echelons of society, if you will, to those prominent scholastic and political classes in the Islamic world, be they in the Ottoman Empire or in Iran. I would love to see a compilation produced containing all of these works.
we're getting questions are piling up, so we need to
yeah,
move through some of them here.
Let's get around to addressing
Betsy says, where is your translation into English available? She's seen a rough translation on the internet and found it less than totally understandable.
It's so the translation is not publicly available. I do have it with me in just it's PDF form, part of my MA thesis. I've distributed my thesis in a very limited scope to a few people. If anyone was interested to read it, and again, I do emphasize that it is an individual translation. This is provisional. It is not authorized or official from the Baha'i World Center. If anyone was interested to read it, I'd be happy to correspond with you over email. I can put my email in the chat if people want to reach me and follow up on that.
Sure, that would be good. Jim asks, did any of the ulama respond to this tablet, and were any of the responses positive?
That's a good question that I don't know if it'll ever be addressed. I did pose this question, and my thanks my thanks and gratitude go to the friends serving at the research department at the Baha'i World Center. This was one of a list of items I had asked them. Was do we know if there was any sort of authored response to this particular work? And I do recall in the response I received from the Baha'i World Center, I think it was in 2021, they had stated that there was nothing documented that they could readily identify, but there is a work. I want to say it's I might be getting it wrong. There's a prominent Shia writer called Agha Buzurg Tehrani, and he has a massive compendium that he put together called Al-Dhari'a or Az-Zari'a. And it's this huge encyclopedia, like biographical work of major ulama in the world of Shiism. And it includes like some of their writings. And so the suggestion was maybe you want to look at some of the volumes of Al-Dhari'a and look for the ulama who are contemporaries of the Bab. You might, just peruse those entries. Maybe somewhere someone read this particular work and, responded to it. I have not done that as of yet. But University of Chicago Library, I luckily still have a guest pass too, and they do have a copy of it. So I could pop down there in the future and just get lost in all the volumes and see if I could find something. That's and then good. We'll have to do a follow-up webinar so I can give you guys the answer.
Stephen says this was an excellent presentation of the background and historical and cultural context of the work and the methodology used by the presenter. Now we really need a part 2 to get the actual content of the work.
Yeah, this is, and again, I regret that, in trying to, put this presentation together today, try to balance between the background, some of the historical considerations, and then addressing aspects of the text. Again, and I've put it in the webinar chat. So hopefully actually here, let me do this. Here we go. There we go. So I've put my email in the chat, and for those of you who are interested in the text itself, I do have the Arabic text in the MA thesis and the English translation with footnotes, citations from the Quran, from the Hadith literature that the Bab makes. They're all there, and you can feel free to contact me if you'd like.
Or maybe we'll get you back sometime to talk about the content.
We'll have a part 2.
That would be good. Farzad says, thank you for this remarkable presentation. Can you please briefly speak of the various phases of the Bab's ministry? There was a time when he had not clearly defined or declared his station.
Yeah, this is another, I think this is a really important aspect when we study the history of the Bab's ministry. And studying the Kitab al-Ulama actually calls this into question and into study. Historically, the external or outward reception of the Bab in the beginning of his ministry was, well, he's a pious Sayyid who claims to have some deputyship with the Imam, that he's in contact with the Imam, and that he's able to convey messages to us on behalf of the Imam. But like we were mentioning just a few minutes ago, if you read the content of the Bab's works, the Qayyum al-Asma, the Kitab al-Ulama, and everything in between, it's so clear with the epithets that he uses to refer to himself that there's just it's an undeniable declaration, a veiled declaration for those who are kind of reading between the lines, as it were, that he is the bearer and the recipient of revelation, and that sacred history is being renewed through him and through his pen. And so, we could talk about the stages, from a purely kind of linear standpoint, as it were. In the beginning, like I mentioned, the Bab, he speaks in the voice of kind of a pious Sayyid, and he is in contact with the Imam. That's not a very controversial idea at that time among the Shi'as. And then once we get, especially to when the Bab is imprisoned in northwestern Iran, in Azerbaijan, in the Persian Bayan, he just forthrightly comes out and says that he is the Qa'im. Before that even, and this actually, I would love to do another study on this and follow up on some work that Dr. Saidi has done. We have an epistle from the Bab in his own handwriting called the Tawqi' Qa'imiyat, which we think was probably written on the eve of his trial in Tabriz. And it's in the Tawqi' Qa'imiyat addressed to one of the letters of the living, Sheikh Ali Torshizi, Janab Azim, that the Bab unequivocally makes the declaration that he is the Qa'im and that he is the fulfillment. He is the eschaton of Shi'ism. He is the promised Imam. And then wrapping up, getting towards the end of the Bab's ministry, towards the end of his life prior to his martyrdom, we have works from him, especially works like the Kitab-e-Panj Sha'an or the Shu'un Khamseh, the Book of the Five Grades, the Kitab al-Asma, where the full expression of divine manifestation is on display. So it's not merely that the Bab is the 12th Imam. He is a manifestation of God. And the passages from the Panj Sha'an are it is just some of the most enigmatic and difficult Arabic one could read. I cannot wrap my head around it, and it is stupendously like magnificent and just totally out of the traditional category of classical Arabic literature. So we kind of have this, if you will. So the linear progression is, outwardly, the Bab appears to be a pious Sayyid who is in contact with the Imam. Then the declaration is extended further to being the return of the Imam. And then right up until his martyrdom, it's clear that he is a divine manifestation of God who has come with a new set of social teachings and writings that supersede the previous one. But the fulfillment and the real promised entity, the real promised one of all ages is coming soon. Mm-hmm. And you should be careful not to let anything in the Bayan prevent you or hinder you from recognizing him when he comes, because that's what the ulama, of the people of the Quran, the Furqan. That's what they did to me. They disputed with me. They cited from their books to argue against me and pronounce death against me. And I warn, as the Bab, often warned his own followers, don't let anything in the Bayan hinder you from recognizing him when he comes, because his coming is imminent.
Yeah, I think that answers Barbara's questions that she asked about the progressiveness of the Bab revealing himself. And of course, 1845 was when this particular volume was produced. Shawdan asks an AI question, which of course is always a hard one for anyone to answer. Has there been any thought of running AI pattern recognition so that we can authenticate the Bab's writings and we'll find and any others that we find in the future? And I'm not even sure you could do that, because the Bab's genres change and the vocabulary can vary from topic to topic very much.
Right. That's a great question. I don't know too much about AI to be able to speak to this. I know there are friends in the community who are specialists in this, and they give. I know that the ABS has a working group on AI. I know that the Wilmette Institute. Dr. Stockman, you yourself talked about it at the beginning of the presentation. Right. I imagine a scenario where AI could be used where the AI is coached or trained to recognize the features of manuscripts. And perhaps AI could be coached to identify handwriting of scribes. Mm-hmm. But as I understand it, I think that it seems like there's already a fairly fleshed out system for that at the World Center. I think that at this time, I'm sure they've probably identified everything that is in the handwriting of the Bab or Sayyid Hosseini Yazdi or Mirza Ahmad Ghazvini. But that's a really great question. There is this outstanding issue, historical issue of there's a work that has been attributed to the Bab in the 20th century by the Azali Babis. It's apparently a Persian commentary on the first chapter of the Quran. Never mind the fact that none of the tafsir or commentary writings of the Bab are written in Persian. They're all in Arabic. And it's a very kind of just sloppy, put together work that they've essentially written to defame Baha'u'llah and try to cast Baha'u'llah in a bad light. And have said that, oh, this is actually something that the Bab wrote and has all these prophecies in it. So I imagine in that instance, maybe I could conceive of a well fleshed out AI, taking, we were talking yesterday, dear Rob, about computational linguistics, being able to identify, hey, we have a text here in Persian that has been attributed to the Bab, but it doesn't really fall into line with the larger body of the Bab's Persian writing. So and I'm speaking as the AI voice here. I don't know if I'm comfortable saying this is from the Bab or not. It's kind of, it's up in the air.
Similar things were done with the writings of Paul, because about half the books attributed to Paul in the New Testament clearly have a different vocabulary, a different sentence structure, a different way of writing long sentences instead of short sentences, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So clearly there's those kinds of techniques that actually can be useful under certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure AI would help very much if someone has taken a tablet of the Bab and modified one paragraph or one sentence of it to change the meaning, because that's such a small change that may not be something that can be detected that way. Constance asks a question which I think we can just sort of skip by. Why was the Book of the Bayan removed from the community years ago? It's never been removed. It's available in Arabic and Persian. Some of it's been translated into English, and I'm sure the day will come when the whole thing is translated into English. But right now, we only have about 5% of Baha'u'llah available in English, and even less of the Bab. And the day will come when the Bayan will be available, but right now it's not terribly relevant because it simply doesn't relate to the current needs of the Baha'i community.
I'd also like to just point out for everyone who's here, the Afnan Library in the United Kingdom and the friends who are serving there and who are the custodians and stewards of that place, especially, you know, I think very fondly of Dr. Moojan Momen and Wendy Momen. The Afnan Library in recent years has been putting a lot of material on their website. One can find higher resolution and better quality scans of these INBA manuscripts from that website. And I would love to just make available here and make known for everyone here the transcription of the Persian Bayan at the Baha'i World Center in the handwriting of Sayyid Hosseini Yazdi has been put up on that website. Not just the black and white photocopy from the 1970s, the actual high resolution digital scan of that draft has been provided by the Baha'i World Center and put on that website. So if you want to go study, it's extremely difficult handwriting.
Yeah,
it's available. You can see Sayyid Hosseini Yazdi's handwriting. It's actual high resolution colored images. And, you know, I think there's another manuscript in that series, volume 24, which is also the Persian Bayan. So
it also occurs to me. Yeah, it occurs to me also it's available, Le Bayan Persan is available in French.
Absolutely.
If you read French, you can read it that way. And E.G. Brown did a summary of it in English that was published in the 19th century. You can get that. Mm-hmm. And Shahrukh Monjazeb has done a summary series of talks for the Wilmot Institute about the Bayan as well.
Right.
So there's actually, that's like 5 or 6 hours worth of videotape. So that you want to know what the Bayan says, there's a lot available now in European languages and available particularly in English. Mm-hmm. Nancy, let me see what she says. It's always helpful and inspiring to hear about the writings in relation to their historical context and times. Your presentation was so clear in relation to a complex subject. Much appreciated, and I hope your scholarly pursuits will continue and continue to be shared. Thank you. So that's a very nice comment by Nancy, and I certainly echo her very much.
Thank you.
Let me see. Daniel asked a question we've already answered. Barbara says the ulama probably just didn't get it. That's probably true also. And let's see. Shaheen says a great talk. Nima, I really enjoyed it. Excuse me, talk a bit about your future projects.
Shaheen, John, it's nice to hear from you and see you in the Q&A section. And also Daniel Grolin, who I served with at the Baha'i World Center several years ago and spent a lot of time with. We, went on a few road trips, visited some historic sites together. Really, really happy to hear from you and see you in the comments section today. I am a very scatterbrained individual, so I don't have the greatest discipline in the world, but I do have a number of projects. I have a proverbial list of things that I'm working on. Most immediately, I'm working on a small book, if you will, about my ancestor from southern Iran, who became a Baha'i during the time of Baha'u'llah. When I was at the Baha'i World Center several years ago, the archives office made available to me all of the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha that are addressed to him and his family available. And I've just been collecting materials, doing research on his life, and I'm writing something up about him. It's a work in progress, albeit very slow. There's a tablet of Abdul Baha that I'm currently working on translating from Arabic into English. It's really, 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 really powerful commentary on one of the most enigmatic chapters of the Quran, the Surah Kahf, the chapter of the cave. I'm about halfway through that and hope to finish it soon. I really wanted to be done with it for the centennial of Abdul Baha's passing, but there were some other, mitigating circumstances that, didn't allow for me to finish it. Among others, there are a couple I've identified tablets of Baha'u'llah that I want to translate, that I've started translating, especially the These are smaller, lesser known writings from Baghdad that are in the language of mysticism. They're just absolutely delightful samples of Baha'u'llah's Persian writing and are just rich with poetic imagery. Also, trying to do a systematic study of the writings of the Bab. There are other tablets of the Bab that I've come across that I would love to study. That other Kitab al-Ulama from Chehriq, I believe it was in Chehriq or Maku. I would love to give that a read and do a similar study. There's never enough time. That's the only problem.
Well, you certainly have plenty of choices, and I'm glad to hear that you've made a start on some of them, though. That's very important. Thank you again, Nima. This was fascinating, and we're very grateful for your time today and your presentation and your articulateness and your enthusiasm and passion for this topic, which I hope will help infect many more people in this particular field and the importance of this study. It's important.
I thank you, dear Rob, for saying that. That's very encouraging, and I hope some of you have felt inspired today to go and read writings of the Bab and reflect on passages from his writings, especially the occasion for today, the occasion beginning later this evening, where Baha'is around the world will observe the birth of the Bab and celebrate it in their communities. So if I have inspired some of you to go and revisit writings of the Bab and Nabil's narrative and then some of the Persian or Arabic sources, that makes me very happy then.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. I want to thank everyone for joining the Wilmette Institute's webinar. We hope you will share some of the ideas and information that you've heard today with others, and please tell others about this webcast. We look forward to seeing you again at a future webinar, and we hope everyone will enjoy the twin holy days that start at sunset today. Until the next time, goodbye.